Next we have Learning Objective 10, which is name the primary and secondary lymphoid tissues and describe their basic roles. So the lymphatic system is the primary system in charge of the second line cellular defenses. So if you have not already, pull up figure 11.5 of your book. This should be familiar because last week we did the different organ systems, and in the lymphatic system you learned the different organs within the lymphatic system. You'll notice that they broke them up into primary and secondary. There are only two primary lymphoid organs. The first one is the thymus. The thymus is going to be important when we get to third line defenses. So this is where we are going to train our T cells, which will be part of our third line defenses. So sort of put that in the back of your head right now. But T in thymus, because T cells will originate and get trained in the thymus. The second place that is primary is the bones, and in particular in the bone marrow. This is where all blood cells arise from. So in the bone marrow, not only will you get your red blood cells, this will create red blood cells or erythrocytes, and I like you to use the fancy words. So the bone marrow will create erythrocytes. It'll create leukocytes, and it will create platelets. Remember, these are your three different types of blood cells. The leukocytes are going to be the primary cells in our secondary line of defense. So this is where we create all of these cells, and then it's also where we're going to create and train our B cells. And this will be important for our third line of defense, just like T cells were important for our third line of defense. Those are your two primary tissues and their roles. Our secondary tissues. There are quite a few more secondary tissues. So we've already talked about one of them, but we have our lymph vessels. And as we saw, the role of lymph vessels was to convey lymph through the lymph system. Along the way in our journey, there's an organ called the spleen. This is on the left-hand side of your body. It's almost behind or right in the area of your kidney that's on the left-hand side. One of the few organs that you only have one of. But as lymph travels through this, one of the places that it will travel through is the spleen, and the spleen will serve to help us filter pathogens. Remember, this is part of your immune system. A second role of the spleen is this is where we'll often store your memory cells. Remember, once you get a disease and your body figures out how to fight it, it creates some cells that they put into a library. And so if we keep these stored in a place that all of our fluids get drained to, then it's a good place to check and see if something that we used to have a problem with has come back. Another organ that will help us to do some filtering are the lymph nodes. These are sort of mini substations that will also help to filter the lymph and screen it for pathogens. Those are the organs that most people are familiar with. Then there are some modified ones. You have what is called the MALT and the GALT. The MALT is mucosal associated lymphoid tissue. These are found around the throat and the pharynx. So these are near the pharynx. Remember that upper portion of that respiratory system. These are your tonsils and your adenoids. In a sense, these are both sentries. Remember, your nasal cavity and your oral cavity both converge at the pharynx. So there's a lot of things that are coming in through this area. Air is coming in through this area, food is coming in through this area. Both can contain pathogens. Your tonsils and your adenoids are sort of sampling those things that are coming in, and if they see something that's unusual, they're going to try to give your immune system a heads up. So this is what we mean by sentries. And unfortunately, your book has mislabeled this. You have another set of tissue like the MALT, but it's called the GALT. Your book has labeled it MALT as well, but the GALT is found in your intestinal area. And this is what are composed of your Peyer's patch and your, oh, just blanked on it. Oh yeah, the appendix. These are going to be very similar to what the MALT does. These are also sentries. There's a lot going on in your stomach. And as we all know, we can have sometimes a dysbiosis of the microbiota within that. If something starts to go wrong in your intestines as you're processing food. Or also remember that another way that things can enter through the digestive system is through the rectum. If anything is going to be caught, once again, you have cells called the Peyer's patch in your appendix. These are sampling things that are going through the intestines. And if they see something is out of place, they can also give the immune system sort of a heads up as to what's going on. So remember, your book is labeled this MALT as well, but the Peyer's patch and the appendix are the GALT, the gut-associated lymphoid tissues. So those are your primary and secondary lymphoid tissues and their basic roles.